Hey guys, Chris here, and I am a Ukrainian Canadian. Today's January 29th, 2023. And let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So, first things first, I want to discuss the map situation in Donbas. And this comes with the assessment of the Institute of War from yesterday, which I wanted to discuss as well. So, according to the Institute of War, here they say that the Russian forces are attempting to prevent Ukraine from regaining the initiative, possibly ahead of a planned decisive Russian offensive in Donbas. So the Russian forces have resumed ground attacks in the Vuhledar area, which they unsuccessfully attempted to reach in late October 2022. If you guys remember, this was where I believe it was the 155th Navy Infantry that tried to take Pavlivka with huge casualties, but they still ended up taking it, Pavlivka. And so now they're concentrated towards Vuhledar. The localized attacks on Vuhledar and settlements in Donetsk and Zaporizhia oblasts are likely intended to disperse Ukrainian troops and set conditions for a decisive Russian offensive in western Luhansk Oblast. So the Ukrainian grouping of forces, so essentially they're trying to disperse the Ukrainian forces on the Svatove-Kremina line to enable Russian recapture of Liman in Donetsk, and the Russian forces could seek to use Liman as a launching point for a decisive offensive to secure Donbas, and as well with a drive towards Bakhmut. So overall, let's take a look at the map here so I can discuss the situation. So as I've mentioned, the Russians did take Pavlivka in late October, early November, and now they're concentrated again at taking Vuhledar. And there have been multiple videos here with huge Russian losses. They've lost a lot of equipment and soldiers here, so they have been unsuccessful for the past week at trying to push and retake or take Vuhledar. The Ukrainians are having success at pushing them back with artillery and drone attacks. And so far, we have to see what's going to happen. But I have no doubts that the Russians are not going to give up. I think this is probably going to be another Bakhmut here, where they're going to constantly send waves after waves after waves of Russian soldiers to take even a small part of Vuhledar. But Vuhledar is very small, so I think eventually they might be successful if the Russians continue pushing here. Unless the Ukrainians have an overwhelming advantage in artillery and tanks, it's going to be very difficult holding Vuhledar in the next few months. So, as mentioned by the Institute of War, before I say that, I want to go into Bakhmut as well. And things are not looking good in Bakhmut either. So the Russians, there is a visual confirmation that came out today of a picture of the Wagner forces in front of Blahodatne. So it's pretty much confirmed that they did take control of Blahodatne. And I think that this puts the Ukrainian positions in a very precarious position in Paraskovivka and Krasnohora, so they most likely will retreat in the next few days because they're technically encircled in here. And also in the south of Bakhmut, around the Klishivka, the Russians have taken position of a small territory here where there's a road that leads into the main highway that is a highway that is used by the Ukrainian forces to resupply Bakhmut with soldiers, weapons, and military assets. So it's not looking great here either. The Ukrainians really have to hold this highway here. So they cannot allow the Russians to get too close to this highway. I think it's going to be very critical for them to hold this position here. This cannot fall. If it does, then again, there is another road that leads into Bakhmut, but it's a much smaller road and much more exposed, as I've said in my previous video, because there is a hill here, and the Russians also control a hill, and they have much more visibility on what's happening on this road than on this one. So overall, it's not looking great. The Ukrainian forces are still holding. Again, the Russians have an overwhelming advantage in artillery and manpower in Bakhmut. They've concentrated all the resources in Bakhmut to really take this down in the next few weeks. And now that's saying that, I want to follow up with what the Institute of War has been saying, is that the Russian forces are trying to pick up the initiative. They are trying to pick up the initiative because they understand that the Ukrainian forces are going to be getting, in the next few months, the new tanks, new infantry fighting vehicles, new artillery, the long-range missiles, and now there's also even talks of Ukrainians getting the F-16 jet fighters. So overall, once Ukraine gets these, it's going to be very difficult for the Russians to launch a massive offensive. So for sure, they're going to be launching an offensive before the Ukrainians get um, all this military assistance. And so I believe that for sure in Donbas, they're going to launch a massive offensive and also north of Ukraine. So they're probably going to go again towards Kiev. As suicidal as it sounds, I think it makes sense for the Russians because this would destabilize all this training and the formation of new battalions for the next couple months with all these new Leopard tanks and the Abrams that the Ukrainians are getting. And that's going to be destabilizing for the Ukrainian forces to really concentrate for an eventual counteroffensive from the Ukrainian side, whether it be in Zaporizhia Oblast here or into Luhansk. It's going to be destabilizing. And so for sure, I don't see them being successful north of Kiev. But for Putin, what is important is to destabilize the government and the forces. And this is what I think the game plan is for the Russians. And for sure, it's going to happen probably within the next month, not month and a half. Most likely end of February, beginning of March, the Russians are definitely going to launch a huge, huge offensive. And a huge offensive is thousands of soldiers, hundreds of, BTRs, BMPs, tanks, T-72s in one direction. Not what we've been seeing the last few months is small platoons of Russian soldiers, waves after small waves of Russian soldiers. It's going to be a massive attack, and I believe it's going to be in Donbas and north of Ukraine, specifically towards Kiev. So let me know what you think about my assessment here. So let's get into the other slides that I've prepared here. And so additionally, yesterday night, massive news coming out from Iran. They've gotten a lot of drone attacks in multiple cities, including Isfahan. And in Isfahan, a major military building was attacked, and apparently it's an ammunitions factory, and allegedly as well, it's perhaps a factory that is the one that's building also the Shahed drones that are being used by the Russians. So this could be good news for Ukraine. And also a huge fire that broke out in an oil refinery in an industrial zone near the northwestern city of Tabriz. So overall, nobody has been claiming responsibility for these attacks that happened yesterday, but most likely it's Israel. It's not confirmed, but most likely it's Israel. And Israel has a history of never claiming responsibility, so we won't know. But I think it's the most likely culprit of these drone attacks. And it's really important, as I've said, because these ammunitions factories are used by the Iranians to supply the Russians with new weapons, specifically the drones. And now where there's talks of ballistic missiles being sent to Russia, the Elbrus missiles. So that's good news for Ukraine. And I thought it was very important to talk about this news coming out of Iran. So also, Poland, it came out a couple days ago, but I didn't mention that, is also going to be sending on top of the 14 Leopard 2 tanks that they're going to be sending to Ukraine. They're also going to be sending 60 older T-72 tanks, and 30 of these 60 tanks are going to be the PT-91 version, which is a modernized T-72. And as you can see here, this is the specs of this PT-91. It's 46 tons. It has 850 horsepower diesel engine, 125 millimeter smoothbore gun, and improved fire control systems that includes thermal gunner sights, laser warning receivers, and Rava explosive reactive armor. So overall, a strong package. And the most important is that this tank is battle ready. It can be sent out directly into the front lines without having to wait, months of training, which is what's going to happen with the Abrams, the Challengers, the Leopards. The Ukrainians can't just get them right now. And these are battle ready, so these can definitely be sent out right now, and that's great news. So hopefully next week or two, Ukraine is going to take possession of these tanks and is going to be able to send them to either Bakhmut, Vuhledar, or on the Svatove-Kremina front. We'll see. Last but not least, this is our favorite daily dose of Russia propaganda. So let's see what Solovyov is discussing in his show. Yesterday, a fundamental turning point in world history happened. There was a rehabilitation of Nazism. Nazi tanks enter Ukraine. For us, a holy war has begun. As for Germany, you cannot destroy us. There are many of us, to your regret. There are millions of us, and a lot of us, and a lot try to fight with us. Then you have to live with us somehow. It will end. What is happening now in Ukraine, calling it a war, calling it a special military operation, does not change the point. It will end sooner or later. And the 100-Year War ended, and the longer Mongol Tatar yoke ended, and what will you do to us? On the same planet, in the same Europe, close to each other, how will we live? I don't know. And now I'm thinking, it's not like the German people are against. The German people, 94% are against the tank deliveries, as the German radio tells us. This means that the leadership of the German people is like this. It means that the Nazis have once again taken the German people in their grip. And we need to liberate these German people from these fascists. So, first things first, as I've said many videos, is that this Russian channel, Россия 1, or all the other Russian state channels, are grooming the Russian population at pretty much telling them that they're fighting fascists, it's a holy war, and pretty much equaling this to the Great Patriotic War of 1940s against the Nazi regime. Right? So they're grooming the Russian population again that all these massive casualties that we're having, all these difficulties that we're having is because we're fighting yet again a patriotic war for the independence of a Russian population. And we see that on a regular basis. Solovyov, Simonyan, the other propagandists are always repeating themselves with the same narrative. And now, as you've seen, they're also saying that we're fighting NATO, that this is not Ukraine anymore, this is a NATO force that we're fighting. So they're trying to explain why they're having difficulty with this special military operation. And, now they're saying that they need to liberate yet again Germany. So again, you understand the level of propaganda that is happening in Russia. It's irreversible, and unfortunately the majority of Russians believe this or are careless and they don't really want to do anything about it. So we can all hope at this point for some sort of internal movement within Russia, a coup d'etat or a revolution that's going to change the situation. It's clear. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed my video. Let me know what you think about the upcoming Russian offensive. It's going to happen. When? It's a question of time when it's going to happen. But for sure, I think north of Ukraine and in Donbas, the Russians are really going to try to push to really destroy the Ukrainian initiative once they get all these weapons from the West. So thank you so much for your support. I'm looking forward to making another video next couple of days, and take care, guys.